how Buster Keaton, the Vagina Monologues, and countless crash test dummies made Mad Max: Fury Road the action movie of the year. The soil in the Hollywood Hills is dust, baked to an orange-gray powder by years of drought. Looking east from the hiking trails on the outskirts of Los Angeles, tender dry scrubland runs all the way to the bare mountains spanning the horizon. The view is so spare, you could be looking at the wake of an apocalypse, and it's only when you turn west, back towards the blue glowing grid of the city and the ocean beyond it, do you feel reassured that we're not, in theory, quite there yet. There are 3 words that instantly make sense of a landscape like this to a certain group of people over the age of 30, and they are, like Mad Max. In 1979, a scrappy, low-budget revenge movie came out of Australia and spread through cinemas around the world like a forest fire. It was about a young cop called Max Rocketansky, played by a then unknown 21-year-old actor called Mel Gibson, who chased murderous biker gangs across a dried-up, dystopian outback. He's still on a high from a preview screening of Fury Road 3 nights ago, hosted by the director Edgar Wright, which seemed to go down well. "I've never seen one of my movies before with the crowd that applauded throughout," he beams. "Lots of cheering, oohs and laughter. Which is what you try so hard to do." For the last 4 decades, Miller has been picking up this stuff as he goes. He didn't attend film school, but trained as a doctor, making experimental short films in his spare time. His idea for the original Mad Max was prompted by 2 things: the violent confrontations on Australian petrol station forecourts during the 1973 oil embargo, and the endless flow of seriously injured young male drivers through his emergency room in a Sydney hospital, who seemed to take a perverse pride in their high-speed brushes with death. The first film's budget was $400,000 Australian dollars, a preposterously measly amount, even by the Australian New Wave's rough and ready standards. Riley Keough as Capable, Courtney Eaton as Cheeto the Fragile, and Rosie Huntington-Whiteley as the Splendid Ingrad. Riley Keough as Capable, Courtney Eaton as Cheeto the Fragile, and Rosie Huntington-Whiteley as the Splendid Ingrad. Photo: Warner Brothers, Village Roadshow Films. The model Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, who has a key supporting role in the film, tells me earlier that day that the shoot was long, exhausting and isolated. "When I shot Transformers 3 I was going home to the Trump Hotel and having a nice hot shower in Naboo," she adds wistfully. For as long as he'd been thinking about Fury Road, Miller had pictured its hero as a heroine. At first, he wasn't even sure it was a Mad Max movie, and only worked the character into the plot later on, as a wild animal trapped in the helter-skelter of the chase. At a press conference at Siren Studios on LA's Sunset Boulevard last weekend, Theron told journalists that the chance to ride alongside this legendary male action hero on an equal footing was simply too tempting to pass on. "When I saw that film, I thought, this is someone who's incredibly careful with the camera and choreographs quite complex events inside the cuts," he enthuses. "The thing about sound is it allows you to cheat, put in little bridges. But in silent films the editing has to be solid. And I asked Margaret Sixel, Miller's regular editor and wife of 12 years, to cut Fury Road as a silent movie." That isn't to say that Miller was standing on the back of a pump trolley, cranking the film reels by hand. Fury Road was shot on lightweight digital cameras, some mounted on the end of a 20-foot boom Miller christened the Edge Arm, which could be swung between the vehicles and dropped within inches of the ground with a flick of its operator's wrist. But he's obviously tickled by the Keaton comparison, and even after 2 Babe and Happy Feet films, he's still the frontier filmmaker of the 70s at heart, putting wigs on watermelons and dangling cameras off the side of speeding buggies. "I stayed as a doctor well beyond the road warrior," he says. "And I always thought I'd go back to medicine, I just had to get these films out first." It was only as time went on that he began to realize how far behind in his work he had fallen, and describes his transition from doctor to filmmaker not as a slow dissolve rather than a sharp cut. In those days, the Australian film industry ran on enthusiasm, he says, before describing the early days of the Sydney Filmmakers Co-op, where he saw the first films by Peter Weir, Gillian Armstrong, Philip Noyce and Bruce Beresford in the space of a few years. And there was no sense that it was a career in it, he says, glowing, as if that was the very best thing about it. "You just made movies,